That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
What I really realize even more now is the effort to erase history, like that, this is doing what especially white people and especially in the Deep South have tried to do anyway, right?
Yeah.
They didn't want us ever telling these stories. They didn't want people ever finding out what was going on there. That's why we can't find names, we can't find records, nobody from the state really ever came and checked on this place, right? And so like there is this kind of intent. This is what we're seeing now is a new version of an old practice, which is the best way to control history is to not talk about it and to not be able to tell.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is Josie Duffy Rice, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hey, Josie, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for being here. I've been so excited about this.
I know, I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. So let me tell the folks a little bit about you. And I always say I'm not going to go overboard. They can always, you can be Googled and find out everything. But Josie is a journalist, writer, law school graduate, and podcast host whose work is primarily focused on prosecutors, prisons, and other criminal justice issues. She received her undergraduate degree in political science at Columbia University, her law degree at Harvard Law School, and has been the recipient of a few fellowships that hopefully we'll get to talk about. Until recently, you were the president of The Appeal, a nonprofit news organization that exposes how the U.S. criminal legal system is failing us. What did I leave out?
That's good. The only other thing I would say is I just finished doing a podcast called Unreformed, which I worked on with your wonderful daughter, and that focused on a school in Alabama, a juvenile reform school. So but that was great. That was a great summary. And I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so it's Unreformed, the story of the Alabama Industrial School for Negro Children. And wasn't it like the top podcast for a while?
Yeah, it was in the top 10. Well, it was in the top 10 for a few days, which was very exciting.
Yes.
And we did pretty well on the history charts. I was really, it's obviously like a heavy topic, and can be it's a lot, right? We tried to, and I think with Taylor's help especially, we tried to kind of make it bearable, but I am really kind of grateful and amazed at how many people have listened, because it's not always easy to listen to these stories, and so I'm so grateful for that there was an audience there.
Well, and it's not, I think what you're saying, or how I felt, is that there's definitely lots of parts of it that are uncomfortable. And but I'm all about uncomfortable conversations, because I believe that's how we learn, and that's how we grow. So that is outstanding that it was well received and that you had so many people listen. So congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, it was obviously such an incredible team effort. But it did take, it took a long time. I mean, we were working on this for like over, a year and a half. I mean, I thought it was going to take a few months, and that I was wrong. And so it's one of those things where when it's done, you're sort of just hoping hoping people find it worth listening to. And I'm glad that I'm glad that, we were able to make it. I feel really lucky that we were able to tell these people's stories as well, because,
Right.
for so long, lots of these people did not talk about what they experienced at the school. They didn't talk about what they had gone through as kids, some of them as young as 11, 12 years old, or younger even. And so it means a lot to be able to have their stories heard, and to have people say, like, I'm sorry this happened to you, like, we hear you, and we understand this was wrong. Like, the state of Alabama has not said that yet, but I think even hearing audience people who listen to it say, like, I'm so sorry this happened to you, I think it really matters.
Right. Well, and I'll tell you, I don't know if Taylor told you, but when I finished the last episode, I was walking around the track and I stopped and I called a friend of mine who is the lawyer who just got the first land reparations
Oh, wow, here in
for
LA.
for Bruce's
Uh-huh.
Beach. And I called him
Uh-huh.
and I said, I'm sending you this now. You have to
Oh
listen
my
to it,
gosh,
and
that's
you have to
amazing.
figure out how to get these people justice.
Oh, I love that.
And he
Yeah.
responded and said, gonna listen to it now, Merle. So don't be surprised if you get a
Great.
call.
That would be amazing. I would love
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, look, the state of Alabama doesn't want to deal with this. They don't want to deal with this. They don't want to hear this. They don't want to, like, they really don't want this part being part of their story. Right. And so it means a lot, I think, to have more pressure and more people hear it, and really push them. I mean, like, there's a part of me that's like, who cares if they apologize? Like, it's already
right,
done. But it does matter to the people who this was done to. Really
right.
does matter to them.
Right. Well, I also got because I posted it on social media, and I got a message from a guy with whom I used to work, and he said, Merle, thank you for sharing this. He's from Alabama, and he said, my brother was there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I was like, are you kidding me? He was like, nobody won't
Right.
talk about it.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not surprised.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, I mean,
anyway,
it was a
let
real experience for people, for years. Very
right.
devastating.
So we're going to come back to that. I want to start, well, kind of have people know a little bit more about you other than what I just shared. And if you would, if you don't mind, kind of walk us through your story, your personal story, where you're from, who
Hmm.
you are personally, like who helped form you into this badass social justice, woman. And how did that happen? And like, just if whatever you're willing to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So um, I when I talk to kids and students, I mostly say, like, try to remind them that so much of this figuring out for me of, like, what work I want to do and where I think I can be useful in the world has been trial and error,
Mhm.
a lot of error. um, but I went to school. I always loved writing. I loved writing ever since I was really little. I loved writing and I loved reading. And I grew up in a family, a very, very social justice oriented family. I grew up, my mother's mother is still living, and she's 92 now.
Wow.
She's was led a lot of civil rights work in Minnesota, where my mom grew up, and was this was fighting for Black people's rights in, people hear Minnesota and they don't think, like, that's not, the middle of the deep South or anything, but she was from Texas, and she had done a lot of work in Texas, and then she moved to a largely white neighborhood in Minnesota, right, and pushed, spent 60 years pushing for fair housing, pushing for integration, pushing for like a better, world for not just Black people in Minnesota, but Black people across the country. And so growing up, she's also the third Josie. I'm the fifth Josie, and my daughter is the sixth Josie.
Wow.
And so I grew up with her name too, which I always felt, she's always been kind of the biggest inspiration to me because she was so tireless in her work. And she really kind of was always good at seeing what else needed to be fixed and what else needed to be done. And then my dad worked, has done a lot of different things over the years, but he went to Morehouse College here in Atlanta and ended up becoming the chief of staff for the first Black mayor of Atlanta, and then worked in kind of city government for a long time. And when I was a kid, like, one thing I really remember is we went on vacation. My parents took me and my sister to Jamaica. I was maybe like 7 or 8, and when we got there, we were staying at some like resort area with like kid stuff, and my dad drove us out into Kingston, which was not a short drive, and was like, everywhere we went, he wanted us to see how people who were struggling were living. Where were poor people living? Where were the people who they didn't want us to see on where we were, right? And so I grew up really, really understanding that we were lucky, and that like most people weren't as lucky as we were, that we did not have, like a good life because we were more valuable, but because we were luckier, right? And that luck it's a lot of people do not get that sort of access. And so for me, it always felt like your work, you're put on the earth to make things better. That's the job, right? That's the mandate. So that's a long way of saying I went to undergrad, and I don't know what I thought I was going to do. And I graduated from undergrad in December of 2008, and I like finished my finals, and I remember looking up at the TV, and there was you could see the job market, you could see the economy like crashing. I was like, I'm never going to get a job. And so I ended up getting a job at the public defender's office, and that changed my life forever. It just changed my life forever. I understood how I wouldn't say I totally understood, but my eyes were opened in a different way to the ways in which a criminal legal system, our criminal legal system shapes neighborhoods and shapes people's lives and plays this looming presence, and not a good one, in poor communities, and in particular. And so I loved it, and I decided to go to law school. I went to law school. I remember my first class, I was like, this is not for me, but I've already taken out all these loans, so I guess I'll stick through. And I never really practiced as a lawyer. I ended up coming out and doing some policy work, but still trying to write a lot. And I freelance wrote, and so I ended up leaving my policy job in 2015. This was 2 years after I graduated from law school. I think the work was not for me. And so I had a rough work experience when I kind of did that policy job. And when I left, I said I didn't want to do this anymore, and I wanted to try to write, and I got a job covering prosecutors. So now my work is kind of in this weird, I did that for a few years, and then I started working at the Appeal and ran the Appeal for a while, and now I do a lot of freelance and podcast work. But overall, I say that my work is, I'm really agnostic about form, and I'm dogmatic about content. Like I know what I care about. I mean, I care about other things, but I know what I know, right? And I spend all my time working on and thinking about and researching the criminal legal system that exists today. You can never really know it because it's so hyper local, so large, and so overwhelming and really opaque. But this is what I'm dedicated to doing, and I'm dedicated to reaching people where I can reach them. So if that's a podcast, if that's an article, if that's a fictional television show, if that's like people learn and absorb information and are shaped by so many different things that I think it's my work and my life's work to to reach them in whatever way that I can.
It's funny you should say that, because you just described me to a T, in that, like, I stream shows. I get addicted to certain shows. And like last night I was watching this show, and it was in Texas, and it had a volcano erupt. And it's a fictional show, but I thought, I wonder if that's based on fact. So of course I Google it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's true. I mean, it's not, it hasn't erupted in, a gazillion years, but there are volcanoes in
Right.
Texas.
Right.
And so
I had no idea.
yeah, so to your point, you can learn if you're curious, right? And it occurs to you that, I'm sure there's some fact, or maybe it's not all fiction. Let me look this up. Um, that's it's a great way to learn things.
Yeah, like we're so shaped by the things we watch, by the television we watch. I mean, so much of the way that people have, trust and have depended on our criminal legal system comes from Law and Order, and,
Right.
cops and NCIS, like all the ways in which popular culture, especially when it comes to our criminal justice system, until, the past couple of years, where I think things are shifting, really reinforced so much of people's perception of it. And so I just think if we really want to have people, if we really want to encourage people to be more skeptical of the systems that that have such an impact on their lives, part of that requires, you can't just write reports, and you can't just file lawsuits, and you can't just write articles, and you can't just work in television. I mean, it's not going to change just through one of those things, right? It's going to change through all of those things. And pop culture, I think, probably is way undervalued in terms of us understanding the impact it has.
Right. Well, and they're smart people like you and Taylor doing these things. I mean, I really have to say again, people need to listen to Unreformed. It's so smart and it's so well done. And I was just in awe after every episode. And so, and also the way you guys, the way you incorporated the music. It's just so
We had an
moving.
incredible music team. I mean, like, I had never even thought about podcast music. I mean, it's just not something that had like crossed my mind. We had such an incredible team, and I'm so glad you enjoyed it, and I really thank you. I think like we had such a great team working on this, and we also had the gift of people willing to talk. I mean,
Mhm.
share their stories. But it really was like, honestly, we could have, if I could have stopped time and just spent another 2 years just researching,
Mhm.
I would have done it, because there are a million stories we just can't, we don't get to tell, because we don't have the records, or we don't know all the people, or, but there are people out there that were at this school, and not just this school, right? There is a school. I mean, Mount Meigs has its particular unique qualities, but I think these kind of places where kids, especially Black kids, were sent throughout history and functionally tortured by the state, and nobody ever knew, and nobody ever was accountable. And those sorts of stories exist in different schools in different states across the country. And so what I really hope is that people who hear Unreformed, they learn more about Meigs, and they push for the state of Alabama, to be accountable to these people. But they also look at, Google your own city, your own county, and ask,
Right.
like, what happened there, right? Because we haven't even hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of what kids went through at institutions like this.
And so let me ask you this, in terms of what is going on in the world today, and how, there's this movement to not share facts and information and actually
Mm-hmm.
erase history. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how does that affect what you do, how you feel about it, your
Mm-hmm.
and what you think? How do you go forward?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think I have two different answers. I think the first one is that part of the reason Unreformed is a sort of unusual project for me is because it is historical. Most of the things I do are more, more,
Current.
more current. But that really opened my eyes, I think, in some ways um, to the power of record keeping and also the power of not record keeping. So in the state of Alabama, it's very difficult to get records from the state. We did manage to find a lot of stuff in archival materials that the state had kept and are technically publicly available, although you have to go to the state capitol and sort through the boxes, but you can find. But for example, like we can't get lists of who went to that school. Some of those schools, like or that school those years. Some of that information is, um, won't be, the state won't provide. Some of it
Mhm,
they don't have because these were Black kids and nobody kept records about them, right?
mhm,
And so, like, what I've really come to think is, or what I've really realized even more now is the effort to erase history, like that. This is doing what especially white people and especially in the deep south have tried to do anyway, right?
yeah,
They didn't want us ever telling these stories. They didn't want people ever finding out what was going on there. They didn't That's why we can't find names, we can't find records, we can't find, nobody from the state really ever came and checked on this place, right? And so like there is this kind of intent that this is what we're seeing now is not is a new version of an
right.
old practice, which is we the best way to control history is to not talk about it and to not be able to tell. So I think I'm very sensitive to the reality that like we have people who think it's better or at least better for them if we don't talk about our history. I really do believe that saying like um, you know uh, like if we don't talk about, or if we don't, whoever doesn't know history is bound to repeat it. Like that's what we see happening right now, right? I would say the
Right.
second thing about that makes me think about is one thing that was really interesting about Unreformed in particular is um, looking up news coverage of the school. So here's a school that started in 1911. We our main focus was this period in the 1960s, around the 1960s, right, where things were particularly bad. This is around the civil rights movement, and this school is outside of Montgomery. So there's this kind of juxtaposition of like down the street from where Rosa Parks is, won't like get off the bus or get up out of her
Right.
seat, and Martin Luther King is marching from Selma to Montgomery. Like down the street from there is this school where Black kids are being tortured and nobody knows about it. But one really fascinating part about this is that, in fact, there was more coverage of the school back then in a lot of ways. I would not say it's critical coverage. I would not say it's sufficient, but they had a better local like news infrastructure then, right? Like
Mm,
we live in a world now where we have hollowed out local news. There are
right.
fewer journalists, there are fewer people to cover these stories. The profit motive has shifted, less people subscribe. You know, Mount Meg's, the institution, is still open, and there is, I mean, 20, 30 times as much coverage of it in the 1960s than there is today. So I'm both worried about erasing what exists in the history we know, and I'm worried that right now, especially in the state of journalism, we have really, we don't, as a country, we do not sufficiently value journalism and local journalism in particular, and the price that we're all paying for that. In a form of like this institution for juveniles still exists and we don't know what's happening there, right?
Right. Right.
And so that just, I think about both of those things when I think about what we're seeing currently from conservatives and the white supremacists that are still exist in this country.
It's interesting because I recently started with a couple of friends a banned book group.
Oh, I love
And
this.
yeah,
Hmm.
and so we read a different banned book every month.
I love
And
that.
and yeah, we started with Fahrenheit, and some of these books we've read before, but we started
Right.
with Fahrenheit because we thought that was really appropriate, and then we've read a couple of other kind of lighter books, and then
Mm-hmm.
this month we read 1984, and that
Oh,
is
wow.
not a light read, but
Right.
it does, it's everybody should read it because it's like almost the script for what's going on
Mm-hmm.
right now.
Totally. Totally.
And it's so scary, but it's like the my goal is try to encourage people to read as much as possible, and actually speak up as much as possible,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not, I've had a couple people say to me, well, this doesn't affect me. It's like, yeah, but it will eventually.
Uh-huh. Yep.
you know
Yeah.
so now let me ask you this. So you went to college in New York.
Uh-huh.
You then went to Boston, and did you just decide to go home to Atlanta, or how did that happen?
No, so I went to college in New York, lived there for um a couple years after, a year and a half, because I graduated a semester early, so I was there for until whatever, a year and a half later. Went to Boston for 3 years, and then came back to New York, and that's where I met my husband, and where I was working for a while. I actually moved to Atlanta in 2017 when I was 8.5 months pregnant,
Hmm.
in part because the idea of raising a kid in New York just felt, I mean, being in New York, I mean, I like, it was always a stretch. Could we pay our rent? Could we get the,
Right.
it's just not for the faint of heart. And I was,
Right.
and I was 30, and I was like, I've been in New York, pretty much the past 12 years, minus 9 months out of the year when I was in Boston for 3 years. But even then, the summers I'm home, and I mean, I'm sorry, the summers I was back in New York. So I felt really like I'm gonna miss it so much. It's gonna be so hard, and I do not miss it. I loved it when I was there, and I really feel happy that I had those years there. But it's been really great to kind of be back home in Atlanta with my family, and be able to raise my kids in a place where they can, they have a backyard, and they have space, and they don't live on top of me, which I don't know if I could have taken. So, but I think there's also downsides, like obviously
It's the
at,
South.
it's the South. It's the South. Yeah. Even that part. I mean, Atlanta is so different than so much of Georgia that I don't even, I mean, look, I'm not thrilled about who my, governor is, but in general, I don't, I would say like, even more immediately than that, it's hard. My husband's also a journalist. Like, it's a tough industry, right? There are no guarantees. People don't have decade long, 2 decade long jobs anymore. Like,
Right.
it feels like, I don't want to say it's a dying industry because we can't afford for it to die, but it can feel that way. And so it's hard to not be in like a big market for our work.
Hmm.
Like, it's hard to not be in DC or Atlanta or LA or New York in some ways, because if one of us, I mean, I freelance right now, but if my husband lost his job or something, you're sort of like, there is nowhere else to work. Like, we don't
Right.
live in a place with all, but uh, I also, as I'm always joking around with my parents, I don't have to pay for babysitting. So there's there are ups and downs, and it's great. Like, it's really, I mean, you understand obviously, because you have, um, you have your daughter and your grandkids around. Like, it's just incredible. I didn't grow up around my grandparents. They lived in Ohio and Minnesota, so I saw them, but just not as much. And it just feels so great for my kids to be able to grow up knowing their grandparents.
Yeah.
It feels I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, my mother retired when both my parents were school teachers, and my mother
Hmm.
retired when Taylor turned 5 so that she could pick her up from school every day.
Oh, I love that. There are
Yeah.
school teachers in LA.
In the Compton School District.
Oh,
So,
wow. Okay. My
yeah,
mother-in-law, my husband's from LA, and my in-law still lived there, and my mother-in-law was also a teacher in LA, and so, um, Yeah, that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a big deal. And so that's one of the reasons I'm enjoying the time that I can spend with
I
the
know.
twins. Yeah,
Because I know the move is sad too.
yeah, it's gonna be
Yeah.
sad, but it'll be good.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't practice, you just kind of skimmed over that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I know a couple of journalists actually, like, Ronan Farrow, went to Yale Law School, he never
Hmm.
practiced. Um, was that a difficult decision for you to make? How did your family
Yeah.
feel about that?
Yeah. I don't think my parents are thrilled. If I were gonna take a wild guess. But I wouldn't say it was necessarily a difficult decision to make because it never felt like something I really wanted to do. Like when I was
Hmm.
in law school, and you know this because you're a lawyer and you might be one of these people. But I was always kind of amazed. Like there were people in my class and including friends of mine, right, who when they say like think like a lawyer, they really could. They really got it.
Right.
They really
Hmm.
were able to kind of formulate the argument in a way that worked with the law, that worked with the court. They were able to kind of um, they had this ability to work within the confines of the law to
Uh-huh.
make the argument that they wanted. I don't
Hmm.
know if I don't know that I didn't have that ability, but I didn't have that. Um, I was not interested in that. I
Me
was way
either.
more interested in the why is the law like this? Like, why would
Right.
we do it like this? And
Or that
does it
makes
make
no sense.
that
This
makes
makes no
no sense. I mean, it was
sense.
just a
Right.
constant thing in my head. Like, this makes no sense. Like, it, and then you hear them sort of say, like, well, it's this way because X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, okay, maybe, but I still don't understand why we would do it this way, and so that was always way more interesting to me and therefore like drove a lot of the kind of career decisions I made. I think
Hmm.
the other thing was like, I, I, I think that maybe some of my skill is, or what I've always kind of wanted to focus on in terms of skill building is like, how do you take these like legal concepts that are intentionally opaque and intentionally not accessible to much of the world, right? And make people and help people understand what they mean and why they are that way. Like before I went to law school, I would hear about laws or decisions and think, okay, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I'm sure
Right.
they have a good reason for doing that. It turns out they don't.
Yeah.
There are no good reasons. These are like, laws made by man, and it's imperfect, and we have not made it easy to criticize because if you're not a lawyer, you just think there's some reason for it's set up this way, and so much of it is just kind of inertia. Um, I really do think a lot of the reason I am not a lawyer is because I was not my skill set. But I also think I didn't even really, frankly, try to develop that skill set because it didn't feel like the best place to spend my energy.
Right. I like to say it just wasn't my jam. It just,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. It was not
it
my
just
jam.
wasn't
Yeah,
my jam.
it
It's
wasn't. It
like,
really wasn't.
I started out in college, because I was a kind of math whiz, so I started out at engineering major, and I got in there and I looked around and it's like, this is not my jam. And then,
Right. That's so
and then I
interesting. Right.
went to marketing and that was my jam. And then I went to law
Right.
school basically because I felt like I had gotten um, uh, treated very poorly by an employer, and I decided to go to law school so that I
Oh,
could,
interesting.
yeah, have something that could never be taken away from me. So I went
Uh-huh.
for the wrong reason. I tell people
Uh-huh.
now as a recruiter, I tell people who are thinking about going to law school, go to law school if you want to be a lawyer.
Yes.
you
Yes.
know,
That weird thing where people say like, "Oh, you can do anything with this degree."
no,
I
you
guess in
can't.
some ways, yeah. I mean, in some ways, I'm like, I guess I am.
Yeah.
Like, I think my degree has helped me, sure. But it's
Yes.
so weird that we tell people like, "Oh, don't worry." Like it's total. You can do anything with it because it really is a very specific skill.
Yeah,
It really is,
it does it teaches you to think in a way that kind of nobody else thinks,
Yeah.
which is kind of cool.
Yeah. I
And
think
if you
that's true.
have
Yeah.
if you take the bar and you pass it, it's the kind of thing that nobody can take away from you unless you do something really stupid,
Right.
which was kind of
Right.
why I did it.
Right.
But I wasn't cut out for it. So I
Mm-mm.
get it. And actually my husband's a lawyer also, and Taylor grew up with two lawyers as
That's so
parents,
funny.
and us telling her, do not go to law
Right.
school.
Right. Right.
And really, to pursue your creative side and pursue what makes you
Mhm.
happy and what you're really good at. And so I'm very proud of both of you.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
for doing that, and I'm glad that you found each other. So we don't have that much. Well, we have a little bit more time, but
Yeah.
how would you? What kind of advice would you
Hmm.
give young folks who want to do something significant, and especially to help the world, right?
Hmm.
Especially in this environment where you can kind of do anything you want, right?
Hmm.
You can make and do anything you want, but you know it you've managed to pull it off. What advice would you give, like, for example, other folks who have gone to law school and it's just not their jam?
Right. It's interesting. I mean, like, I guess the first thing I would say would be that um, it's generous. It feels so generous, and also to me feels so inaccurate to say that I've been able to pull it off because I'm like, I'm still figuring out. And we all sort of feel like. I think about what I would have felt like as a kid seeing me, and I would have been like, man, she must have it figured out. And the truth is, I don't. Um, so again, I think a lot of it is trial and error, right? And being okay trying something out that you might not be good at, or it might not be for you. And it's, sorry,
That's good.
it might not be for you. And that's okay. And it's also valuable to know what doesn't work for you. You know, law school in that way was really valuable for me because I had not really had that experience yet where I was like, no, not for me. You know, like
Hmm.
undergrad, like was fine. And, I didn't really understand that I had strong opinions about like what I ended up doing. And I only had those strong opinions once I realized what I didn't like. And so that was like very valuable for me, even if it didn't turn out um, exactly how I wanted. I would say the other thing is there are so many things that need help that
Hmm.
like we need everybody, right? There's space for you, there's space for your skills. Sometimes it can be a process figuring out how best to utilize that space, and how best to get in. But the world needs is, it's all hands on deck, right?
Right.
Times are tough, and uncertain, and the best thing that we can do as a world, as a community, as a race, as a nation, is to, help, because it gives people hope. um, the other thing I would say, sorry, and then just the last thing I'll say is that, like, one of the things I've really noticed is that, I'm at a point now, I'm 10 years out of law school. I just went to my 10-year law school reunion. And I had this kind of realization, which was you see all these people who went the way they did the thing, right? They were
Hmm.
good at the thing and they did the thing and they are good at it. And they're, now they're doing like, now they're not the first year associate, they're the 10th year partner, and they're,
Right.
and it's like, it's working. And also they don't really care about the work itself. Um, it's, they, like, just because of whatever deals they're working on or projects are on, it's not their, they don't, it doesn't motivate them very much. And
It
that's
doesn't
it.
affect them personally in
Doesn't
any
affect them
way.
personally. They don't feel, and that's a really, frankly, that's a really hard, like, life to live, to,
Yep.
to be working all the time on something you're not really that interested in. And so sometimes people say to me, like, oh, it's so, like, you know, so good of you to work on these things and give this to the, like, do these things. And I'm like, actually, like, I love this stuff. I do what I love. And that is that's better than the other stuff, in my opinion. I mean, that's not insulting or criticizing people who have gone a different way, but I just think it can feel really it can feel really scary to step away from the stuff you don't care about and do the stuff you do care about. And I think
Right.
it's really also great. You won't be disappointed.
It takes courage,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
It
it
takes
does.
courage
Yeah.
because you're going against the norm. I mean, most people, I mean, it also to me says that, you're not worried about what people think. You're really more a leader than a follower. Um, and I think that that's commendable. So
Thank you.
this podcast is called BS Beyond Stereotypes. And the one question I haven't asked you is, what stereotypes do you feel that people make about you and
Hmm.
why? And are they right or wrong? And how have you overcome them?
It's a great question. And I think um I think I would have two different answers. One would be of my experience in law school, which was my biggest regret from law school, easily, is that I didn't speak up more. That when
Hmm.
people said things that I found, um, at the very least, unrepresentative of the real world,
Hmm.
but also sometimes offensive and
Offensive.
racist or sexist or classist, I was quiet very often. And part of that was because I was one of the only Black people in my section. Um, you know, it's a small Black population, relatively small Black population at the law school at Harvard, although it's it's
Bigger
bigger
than
than a lot of
most.
schools. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Exactly. But, and so I didn't want to be the person, I didn't want to ask the dumb question. I didn't want to say the
Hmm.
wrong thing. Now I recognize, like, man, that was my last chance at getting at some of these people, because these
Hmm.
people go on, they clerk for the Supreme Court, they go and make laws, they go and, fight, become partner at law firms, and they don't have anybody pushing back on them really anymore. And I really regret that I let the fear of being stereotyped as the affirmative action kid or the dumb kid or the whatever,
The
but
angry Black
yeah, the
female.
Bangor Black female, exactly. That I let that dictate my willingness to speak up, because
Yeah.
I think that was not just harmful to me. I think it was harmful to my classmates. They
Mm.
like like I had things to say that they could have heard and they didn't.
Right.
I think the other, you know, I think the other kind of um, stereotype that really exists about people in journalism, and I think I'm in a kind of different place, right? Because I think it's really hard to be in journalism right now, in part because, like I said earlier, it feels like a dying industry, and there's this real narrative of like journalists as elite, and nobody likes the media, right? And
Right.
so every journalist I know, and it's on both sides, like I don't even like the media and I work in it, so every journalist I know kind of is kind of battling this, oh, you're a journalist, you don't really understand the struggles of real people, you're a vulture, you're highfalutin, like this kind of
Right.
narrative of us as being out of touch, which I think, of course, like, when there are obviously large parts of um experience, like there are large areas of the world that journalists, just by we don't understand everything just because we cover things, right? I've
Right.
never been to prison. I don't know what it's like to spend 30 years in prison. I try to represent that, but it is absolutely true that I don't have all of that background knowledge. I would also say that, like, it's it's um I worry about the way that we think about journalism. The free press is like one of the most amazing values of this country.
Yeah.
The need for accountability in our among our elected officials, among the people who make decisions for us, among the real elite, is really important. And so I think the stereotypes of media that have been perpetuated, not, I mean, largely by the right, but not exclusively by the right, are um, are harming all of us again, because I really think the lack of um, the dying off of media is the dying off of democracy, right? It's a
Yeah.
big deal if you live in a county without a paper. Like,
Yes.
these are people who control your lives. And there are states right now that don't have daily papers anymore. I don't think Wyoming has a daily paper anymore. I know
Well,
there are only like 10
and
people in Wyoming, but they deserve some coverage.
well, and dumbing down the media and
Yes.
coverage just dumbs down our population.
Right, exactly, exactly. And it's so I feel I feel I think I mean there are all the other stereotypes, right? I'm a Black woman. I am from the South. I like work in largely white fields, and I've kind of worked in largely white fields forever. So I think there's some of that as well. But I would say in particular, like the ways in which being a Black woman in law school, and also being part of the media, like those to me seem like the stereotypes in um, that have such bigger implications, right? Way beyond me. But I think about not just me in law school, but everybody, every Black woman lawyer I know who maybe didn't speak up when they wanted to in law school because what if, and
Right.
that means that overall that's like a huge, huge loss.
Right. Right. Well, any table or any setting that you're in and you don't speak up because you're afraid of the consequences,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a lived experience that someone else can learn from,
Mm-hmm.
is a loss.
Yeah, I
And
absolutely.
yeah, and the idea, that's one of the reasons I do this podcast, is because I want people to hear from folks like you who, are, have courage, have taken risks, have done
Mm-hmm.
something different, who've, come to that realization that it makes more sense to speak up than not, and be
Mm-hmm.
yourself and be authentic. And it's okay, to do
Yeah.
that. That's why I do this.
Well, I'm so glad that you are spreading that message and telling the world that, because I think what you said is so true. It's such a gift to be able to hear from other people and hear their experiences. It really is a gift, right? And
Yes.
we are in a world right now where people think it's a burden, just exclusively a burden. They don't want to hear from us. They don't want to hear. I mean, how amazing is it that we live in a place where people do have different experiences and they do have a lot to share. And the question is whether or not we're going to value that.
Right. And as I don't have to tell you because this is what you do, but storytelling is important and it's the key to community and
Yes,
understanding and
yes,
compassion and
yes,
empathy and all of
yes,
that.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
we are out of time. I do want to say that I Googled your grandmother,
Oh,
and her name is Josie Robinson Johnson, correct?
yeah, yep, yep,
Okay.
that's her.
So I
Yeah.
want everybody to Google
Yes,
Miss
yes.
Johnson and read about her because I think we will all have a better understanding of why you are who you are.
She is
Um,
just my absolute idol. I feel so lucky to have her, and my kids get to know her, and to your point about history, like it makes me really sad to think that there are people who want to erase work she's done. She's still living,
yes.
and there are people who want to erase her story. They're not even waiting till till that generation is gone. They want to erase it now. And so
Yes.
it's just a reminder, like this is history, but only barely. I mean, like this is stuff that has happened recently. and
Yes.
and we don't and we see this effort to get rid of it. So it's quite depressing.
Well, let's dedicate this episode to her. And
Yes, that would be wonderful.
please, when you see her, give her a hug for me.
I will,
and,
and I'm so
and
glad that we got to talk.
yeah, and I look forward to what you do next. Hopefully, you'll find another project to do with Taylor. She loves you.
Yes, we're gonna do a project together, I think. I'm very excited.
Awesome. And thank you so much. And thank you, Josie, for being here to BS with me today.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and thanks to everyone for listening. Until the next episode, remember that everybody is different and different is good.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.